top of that, the massive flow. So the DNA testing, the real actual rapid testing at the stations, and just the threat of that could take a potential 2 or 3 hour interview and make it into minutes, because people broke left and right that it's not really my kid, because we would tell them, you're going to be prosecuted. You can tell me the truth now. But now they don't have the ability to do the threat. And then if someone sticks to their story, they don't have the ability to actually identify that there is no actual biological connection between these people. More children will be trafficked. More children are at risk.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentlelady yields. I now recognize Mr. We have Ms. Titus here. I recognize Ms. Titus from Nevada.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I apologize for being late. I was in a markup, but it doesn't sound like I missed much because it's the same old points being hammered over and over again for political reasons and not trying to really look for a solution. Also, this committee just continues to look at this one topic. If you're talking about dereliction of duty, perhaps we should be looking at some of the other aspects of Homeland Security, like cybersecurity. That's such a major issue, or real immigration reform, or domestic terrorism. Those are all part of our charge, and not looking at those, I think, is a dereliction of duty. In my district, we have a lot of mixed status families. We have somebody who is a dreamer, somebody who's TPS, somebody who's a citizen, somebody who has no papers, and somebody who doesn't even know what they are. So that's 5 problems all in one. I'd like to ask you, Ms. Acer, if you would comment a little bit about the TPS aspect of that, because it was just announced that the president was going to extend TPS for El Salvador, Honduras, Nicaragua, and Nepal. Can you talk about how that helps with humane immigration or accommodation of people here? We've got 6,000 TPS holders, mostly from El Salvador and southern Nevada. So I'd just like to hear more about where that is.
Yeah, TPS is critical. It is, a life-saving protection for people from places that, are too dangerous, or for other reasons people cannot be returned to. So it's a lifesaver. It could be improved, and there needs to be access for people to eventually, after a certain number of years, to really be able to stabilize their families, to be able to bring their kids to safety, and ultimately to get onto a path to citizenship.
Well, I know that the former president ended TPS, excuse me, for some of these countries. And for some people who had been here 20 years, had established a family, had a job, paying taxes, and then suddenly that's yanked away and they're sent back. So maybe you could help us with some ways that we could actually put forward to improve the system, as you mentioned.
I'd happy to suggest changes, and I think one of the most important ones is that people can actually get onto a path to citizenship at some point, and also to bring their families together. We also need to make sure to be using redesignation authority, because sometimes situation in a country triggers a need for TPS, and then time can change again. Time goes on, but actually the situation is even worse, so that TPS needs to be redesignated to make sure to protect people.
Thank you. Also, I think you were on the ground when Title 42 was lifted. There were some that were just so anxious to see these people rush across the border, chaos, sending down troops. I don't know if they thought there was going to be some confrontation, but of course it didn't happen, and the numbers have actually gone down. Would you talk about that a little bit for us?
Yeah, so we were there, including on the first day after Title 42. We were in Matamoros. We also were in Reynosa. Everywhere we went, we met asylum seekers. We spoke to, I think, hundreds of asylum seekers. I was part of a delegation with the Haitian Bridge Alliance and other NGOs, as well as just on our own with our own researcher. And people were struggling to follow the process for seeking asylum at ports of entry. We were asked so many questions about the CBP One app. People were trying to use it, couldn't get an appointment. There are tons of glitches, as you've all heard. Some people with dark skin were having trouble actually being able to register for the system. Many people don't have phones. Asylum seekers, we spoke to many families who had been robbed of their phones or didn't have one to begin with. In some cases, there was a need for internet access. People were walking around struggling, trying to get sufficient internet access to be able to actually use the app. And the other problem is that the number of appointments are really small. When you look across the border, and you have asylum seekers who've been waiting and waiting for weeks and months, and it's in the U.S. interest for people to actually go to ports of entry and seek asylum there if possible. I stress also, though, that it's so important for there to be access to asylum for people who can't use and access CBP-1. Not everyone can. There are people who don't speak languages that are used by the system, and as I mentioned, there are people without phones. We've got to make sure that our ports of entry are operational and that there's ways for people who are seeking asylum who don't have to have CBP-1 appointments to be able to do so, and who can't get them. And asylum seekers from Mexico, there are asylum seekers from Mexico who have been waiting and waiting. It's the next door country, but can't get in at one of the ports of entry.
Thank you, and I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Gentlelady yields. I now recognize Mr. Strong from Alabama.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Wolf, under U.S. law, the Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security is, and I quote, charged with a duty to control and guard the boundaries and borders of the U.S. against illegal entry of aliens, close quote. Mr. Wolf, would it be safe to say that it is a responsibility of this role to be apprised of strategies, tactics, and methods being employed to exploit our borders?
Absolutely.
Would you also say that a great deal of time at DHS is devoted solely to briefing and keeping the Secretary informed on such matters?
Yes, there are numerous ways the Secretary stays informed about a number of things going on at the border.
Thank you. On several occasions this year, when he has appeared before Congress, Secretary Mayorkas has testified that he was unfamiliar with some of the tactics being employed by cartels at the southern border. Mr. Wolf, in what circumstance would you say it's understandable or acceptable for the Secretary of Department of Homeland Security to be unaware of what is happening at the border?
In that particular instance, I can't imagine how he's not aware of those tactics.
Is it a total failure at every level?
Again, I can't imagine why he would not know that. Just by visiting the border, talking to Border Patrol agents, and understanding that, frankly, it's just common knowledge that those are the tactics.
I would think so also. Mr. Wolf, Mr. Scott, Mr. Enlow, whoever's comfortable, Secretary Mayorkas has had more than 2 years to observe the failure of his policies and either change course or resign if not allowed to by President Biden. He has done the opposite, doubling down on those policies and implementing new unlawful programs. Does this strike you as someone helplessly responding to a crisis or someone intent on policies that caused the crisis?
I believe he's very committed to his policies, and I don't mean to be out of order, but I'd like to comment on your last question for the Secretary.
Please do.
I put in writing as the Chief of the Border Patrol what those tactics were in a memo that went through Acting Commissioner Troy Miller, and it was addressed to Secretary Mayorkas. It's clearly outlined, and that was while I was still Chief of the Border Patrol.
Thank you, Mr. Scott. I appreciate that. And I want to come back to you with this question. Why would the Department of Homeland Security Secretary oppose the construction of more border wall system, especially when Border Patrol agents routinely say it's an important part of the toolkit?
Because the president campaigned on no more border wall.
Thank you. Mr. Scott, since you're here, and I want to thank you again for coming back before us. I know I've met you several times. During the Trump administration, the big thing that I saw whenever you were there, Border Patrol apprehended, processed, and by ICE air returned these illegal aliens to the country of their origin. What message did this send when you were there to those seeking to enter America illegally?
That is a huge deterrent. A couple of things happen, I think, and we keep talking about gotaways, but what people aren't really understanding is that every gotaway and then every person released into the United States does exactly what you would do. They call home and they tell their family and friends where they're at. They check in. Their friends and family hear that message gets out. When we put people, and then more come. When we put people on airplanes and they show up back in the home country after expending all these resources They have horror stories about the trip, unfortunately, but they chose that trip. But they tell those stories, and then they see them back home. And that has a huge deterrent effect. That actually saves people's lives because people choose to stay where they're at and make things better as opposed to put themselves in the cartel's hands.
Thank you. Mr. Wolf, Secretary Mayorkas has apparently turned off all the fiber optic sensors embedded in the border fence that was built during the Trump administration to allow the Border Patrol to detect when and where people are trying to either climb the fence, which is not easy, or cut through the fence with welding equipment. Do you believe Secretary Mayorkas has played a role in directing the Department of Homeland Security to halt the completion of lights, post-construction, and/or turn off the fiber optic sensors embedded in existing fences?
So I can't think of a reason why you would decommission or turn off capabilities that are already installed. The border wall system is much more than just that physical infrastructure. Lights, camera, roads, physical access, all the things that Border Patrol agents need to do their job. Why you would turn those off, it's beyond me. I can't even think of a reason why you would do that.
Thank you. And with 8 seconds left, I know it was mentioned that illegals don't have internet access. I want to let everybody know that there's counties in Alabama that don't have internet access also. We need to work in America to solve that problem. Thank you. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. I now recognize Mr. Ezell from Mississippi.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Fentanyl poisoning is now the largest leading cause of death for Americans 18 to 49. As a 42-year law enforcement officer and a sheriff, I saw the devastating effects of young teenagers and young adults dying as a result of this, and it's heartbreaking. The death toll continues to climb. The rising power of the Mexican cartels continue to grow, and this low-cost manufacturing of a drug is terrible to this open border. Mr. Scott, do you believe the current fentanyl crisis is the consequences of Mr. Mayorkas' open board policy?
I believe that in part it really is, and I want to highlight some misinformation. People keep talking about seizures as if it was the total. More fentanyl is seized at the ports of entry than in between the ports of entry, but it's because CBP officers are there doing a fantastic job. They're ready to greet everybody every day. We're leaving hundreds of miles of border open every single day, no one patrolling it, but yet Border Patrol is still catching fentanyl between the ports of entry. The metric needs to be how much is available in our cities, and there's no shortage.
Mm-hmm. In your role as Border Patrol Chief, how you have seen cartels, tell us how you have seen the cartels capitalize on the border crisis and use the surges for migrants to smuggle their narcotics.
So historically, the cartels have used any distraction they can. And honestly, a lot of people have a hard time picturing this. So just think of sports. You fake a play to the right, you run the real play to the left. That's what the cartels have done. They've always done it. They've always tried to do it. When you've seen in El Paso a young child, I think the last one was basically like a several-month-old child being dropped over the fence in plain sight of cameras where they know it's going to be viewed, that's because they know agents are going to prioritize taking care of that baby and they can push something else through. They now, unfortunately, we've given them millions of distractions. We've given them right now, 3,500 distractions a day that the Border Patrol is having to go deal with so that they can bring anything they want in. It's lowered their overhead, it's lowered their risk, and it's a direct impact on the ability to get narcotics in cities in the U.S. And other threats.
Thank you. Mr. Wolf, last year, 850 migrants died at the border. This is the highest ever recorded. The average under the Trump administration was 280. If this is the case, why does the Biden administration continue to tout their immigration policies as safe, humane, and orderly?
I'm not sure I have a question or an answer for you, Congressman. The amount of deaths that are increasing in that desert and along that river are a factor of the amount of people coming across the border. Mm-hmm. We're seeing a huge spike, right? So we were at 10,000 a day. For a long time, we were at 7,000 a day. We're still at 3,500 to 4,000 a day, right? You only have to go back to Secretary Jay Johnson under the Obama administration that said 1,000 a day is a bad day for the Border Patrol. We're in crisis mode. Mm-hmm. We're still at 3,500. So this idea that somehow we have retracted from 10 and that's there, we should pat ourselves on the back and say, good job. We're still losing the ball game in a big way. And so I think that is something we need to look at.
Absolutely. Thank you. Mr. Wolf, I keep thinking about these words, safe, humane, and orderly. Do you believe that Secretary Mayorkas has been honest with the American people?
I don't. Not only on those words, but when you talk about the border secure operational control, he talks about putting people in expedited removal. He knows what that means. The staff of this committee knows what that means. None of those individuals will likely be removed. All they have to do is claim asylum, and they are pulled out of expedited removal. So he uses terms like these for the American people to try to explain away what's going on along that border. But those that work in the department know immigration. They know something else. And so if you're a Border Patrol agent and you hear these words, and you're saying, your political leadership is saying, look, I'm removing all these folks under expedited removal, that's not the case.
Mr. Scott, could you add anything to that?
I would agree to that 100%. The words very rarely match the actions. I'll just leave it at that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
The gentleman yields. I now recognize Mr. Burkeen from Oklahoma.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, Secretary Mayorkas swore an oath to support and defend the Constitution against all enemies, both foreign and domestic. He swore that oath to defend against all enemies, foreign and domestic, to the Constitution. He did not swear an oath to support this administration's policies. And by this majority membership's count, Secretary Mayorkas has chosen to ignore or refuse to enforce over 10 different federal laws, and this is a dereliction of duty and a violation of his oath. The rule of law, which is a term that's thrown around oftentimes by members of Congress, it means that nobody's above the law. It means no member of the Congress. It means no member of the judiciary. It means no Secretary of Homeland Security. The rule of law matters. What the Constitution and what federal law dictate matter. Speaking about the rule of law, Margaret Thatcher once said, any country or government which wants to proceed towards tyranny starts to undermine legal rights and undermine the law. President JFK, John F. Kennedy, once said, certain other societies may respect the rule of force of law. We respect the rule of law. Barack Obama, former president, said one of the challenges of a democratic government is making sure that even in the midst of emergencies and passions, we make sure that the rule of law prevail, prevail. So I want to talk about the federal law, and I want to talk about the areas that have been violated. Section 103A5 of the Immigration and Nationality Act says that he, speaking of Mayorkas in his position currently, shall have the power and duty to control and guard the boundaries and borders of the United States against illegal entry of aliens. Mr. Scott, how is Mayorkas violating this?
He's not even trying. So all you have to do is look at his words, any public statement. He continually talks about creating pathways for more migrants to come to the United States. CBP One app is nothing more than an invitation worldwide without any immigration documents or any right to come to the United States. You've never heard him once support any initiative the Border Patrol put out that actually allows them to increase their situational awareness and be able to stop the flow. He even disciplined agents for trying to stop the flow.
Mr. Wolf, I'm going to read something, throw this to you. On May 10th, the reporter immigration analyst Todd Bensman reported ahead of the expiration of Title 42 that Mexican immigration officials were informing him they were coordinating with DHS personnel on the other side of the border to move illegal aliens from the Mexico side of the Rio Grande to the American side. In other words, Mexican DHS officials were helping illegal aliens cross into the United States. This would violate Section 274 of the act we just cited, which prohibits aiding and abetting illegal immigration or helping someone enter the country illegally. What are your thoughts on this?
I think it's concerning. Look, Border Patrol agents are in a difficult position when they see hundreds of folks coming across that river. They want to make sure that they're safe and secure, but at the same time, they should not be facilitating that either. So my guess is those decisions had some buy-off from leadership somewhere in the department.
They would have to. They would have to. No one would take that upon their authority without Mayorkas knowing about it. Mr. Wolf, Section 212 of the Immigration and Nationality Act, also just mentioned beforehand, says that parole can only be granted on a case-by-case basis, a temporary basis for an urgent humanitarian reason, significant public benefit. How is Mayorkas' mass release of illegal aliens into the interior violating this U.S. law? And where is he deriving the authority to violate the clear language of the statute?
So we use that authority very differently. Urgent humanitarian need is if someone needs to come into the United States for a medical procedure of some kind. You allow them in, and then obviously you remove them as well. For a significant public benefit, you want to parole someone in to probably testify at a criminal trial. You parole them in, and then you ask them to leave. What you don't do is parole 360,000 individuals a year from 4 different nationalities, regardless of who you are, regardless of what you do. The simple fact that you come from that country, that you are somehow granted parole. I think it's interesting that those individuals are not being put in the asylum system. So the administration is either signaling that they don't qualify for asylum or the system's broken, which we know it to be. Instead, they're paroling them in, which is a different set of benefits. Again, it's a little bit of a shell game that they're using.
Is he adhering to federal law?
I don't believe he is.
No. And last question, Mr. Scott. Article 4, Section 4 guarantees to every state a Republican form of government and to protect those states against invasion. 5 million people, more than the population of Oklahoma, have come in illegally under the Biden administration. Do you believe that he is violating the Constitution, Article 4, Section 4?
I believe what we have at the southwest border currently is an invasion, but for a slight different reason than most people understand. The illegal aliens themselves may not be the invader, but they are being used by a cartel that has nation-state power. People don't understand the power of the cartel in Mexico, the influence they have on the government, the weaponry they have is equivalent to many, many countries. And that cartel is using this massive illegal immigration every day to invade our country, the sovereignty of it, and to pose real threats. And through fentanyl alone, which is only one of the things they smuggle, they've killed more Americans than most wars. It's an invasion.